So this cherub was one of these beings and gets cast down to earth or the underworld. And what do we have? We have a reasonable description here of a supernatural rebellion that will later become known as the rebellion of Satan, the adversary.
Satan decides that he can do without the transcendent, he can do without God, and that's why he foments rebellion. As soon as Satan decided that what he knew was sufficient, immediately he was in hell.
In this video, you will hear Dr. Michael Heiser and Jordan Peterson discuss what is often called the greatest rebellion in history, the rebellion of Satan. They explore what the Bible actually says about this event, how the conflict unfolded in the spiritual realm, what happened to Satan afterward, and how these events are connected to the loss of Eden and humanity's fall. Watch carefully to separate biblical truth from tradition.
Now a few lines from verses 16 and 17. So I have struck you down from the mountain of God. I have destroyed you, O shielding cherub, from among the stones of fire. You grew haughty because of your beauty. You debased your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I have cast you to the ground. Now there are a few things to notice here in this passage. First, there is certainly a reference to a supernatural being, an anointed shining cherub, who is cast down. Second, he's cast down to the earth, and the term in Hebrew can mean underworld realm of the dead as well as the land, or the earth as we know it. And third, there is a specific reference to Eden. Eden is called the mountain of God and the garden of God, and these are terms that would be used of the divine abode in the ancient Near East. Now, this being had been among the, quote, stones of fire. This is biblical language for stars or meteors, celestial objects, which were thought to be living beings, and so this language gets used of supernatural beings. So this cherub was one of these beings and gets cast down to earth or the underworld. And what do we have? We have a reasonable description here of a supernatural rebellion that will later become known as the rebellion of Satan, the adversary. But did you notice there's no reference in this passage at all to a third of the angels? Now the same issue is true of the second passage that's used to defend this idea, and that's 2 Peter 2:4, which reads, "For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but held them captive in Tartarus in chains of darkness and handed them over to be kept for judgment," then so on and so forth. This is the way God would treat false teachers. Now this passage also has no reference to a third of the angels, none at all. But it does describe angels, plural, that sinned. It's a little misleading, though, to use this passage as proof of a rebellion before Adam and Eve of a third of the angels. Verse 5 connects this sin of the angels with the flood and Noah. The passage actually refers to Genesis 6:1 through 4, event with the sons of God and the daughters of men that happened right before the flood or shortly before the flood. It does not refer to a rebellion before the fall of Genesis 3, and it also doesn't mention Satan. So we have some significant disconnections between Ezekiel 28 and 2 Peter 2 to defend this idea that a third of the angels rebelled with Satan. Now the two passages we've talked about to this point provide no evidence that Satan rebelled with a third of the angels. Neither passage mentions a third of the angels, and in fact the second passage doesn't even reference the Garden of Eden. Now there's one last passage offered as evidence for this idea, and that is Revelation 12, where the archangel Michael shows up. I read, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness. Now war arose in the heavens, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. Now this passage, Revelation 12, is the only passage in the Bible that uses the word third along with angels.
Dr. Michael Heiser explains that the popular idea of Satan leading a rebellion of 1/3 of the angels is not clearly taught in the Bible. He shows that passages like Ezekiel 28 and to Peter to describe supernatural rebellion, but never mention 1/3 of the angels. Revelation 12 is symbolic, not a literal pre-human war. I agree with Dr. Heiser that this belief comes more from tradition than scripture. Now, let's see what Jordan Peterson says about this topic.
An idea much later that John Milton develops in Paradise Lost, which is an amazing poem. And it's a profound enough poem so that it's almost been incorporated into the biblical structure, I would say. So the corpus of Christianity post-Milton was saturated by the Miltonic stories of Satan's rebellion. None of that's in the biblical texts, or it's only hinted at in very brief passages. And Milton wrote his poem to justify the ways of God to man, which is quite an ambition. Really, it's an amazing, profound ambition to try to produce something, to produce a literary work that justifies being to human beings, because that's what Milton was trying to do. So one of my readers here sent me a link the other day, or viewers, to a work of philosophy by an Australian philosopher whose name I don't remember, who basically wrote a book saying that being as such, human experience, is so corrupt and so permeated by suffering that it would be better if it had never existed at all. It's sort of the ultimate expression of nihilism. And Goethe in Faust, his Mephistopheles, who's a satanic character, obviously, has that as a credo. That's Satan's fundamental motivation, is his objection to creation itself is that creation is so flawed and so rife with suffering that it would be better if it had never existed at all. And so that's his motivation for attempting to continue to destroy it. In Milton's Paradise Lost, Satan is an intellectual figure. And you see that motif emerge very frequently, by the way, in popular culture. So, for example, in The Lion King, the figure of Scar, who's a satanic figure, is also hyper-intellectual. And that's very common. That, you know, it's the evil scientist motif, or the evil advisor to the king, the same motif. It encapsulates something about rationality, and what it seems to encapsulate is the idea that rationality, like Satan, is the highest angel in God's heavenly kingdom. It's a psychological idea, you know, that the most powerful sub-element of the human psyche is the intellect. And it's the thing that shines out above all, within the domain of humanity and maybe across the domain of life itself. The human intellect, there's something absolutely remarkable about it, but it has a flaw, and the flaw is that it tends to fall in love with its own productions and to assume that they're total. Solzhenitsyn, when he was writing the Gulag Archipelago, had a warning about that with regards to totalitarian ideology. And he said that the price of selling your God-given soul to the entrapments of human dogma was slavery and death, essentially. And Satan, in Milton's Paradise Lost, Satan decides that he can do without the transcendent, he can do without God, and that's why he foments rebellion. It's something like that. And the consequence of that, the immediate consequence from Milton's perspective, was that as soon as Satan decided that what he knew was sufficient and that he could do without the transcendent, which you might think about as the domain outside of what you know, something like that, immediately he was in hell.
In this video, Dr. Michael Heiser and Jordan Peterson discuss the theme of Satan's rebellion and how it has been understood over time. Heiser focuses on what the Bible actually says challenging popular assumptions that are often taken for granted. Peterson approaches the topic from a symbolic and psychological perspective, exploring the deeper meaning of rebellion and order. If you enjoy thoughtful and meaningful discussions like this, subscribe to the channel for more content.